even know whether we're going to be opening entirely in the fall, no less whether we're going to be able to run summer school or the implications for learning loss from all of this closure. So I want to share with you a little bit of data, and then as we go through this presentation, a little bit of data just to contextualize us in the reality that is today. And then we will go forward through a directional course that I do think is of high value for us. And I'm going to ask the committee to keep in mind that we are going to be recommending a one-year plan, and that we're going to be looking for your guidance. We'll share with you all of the input, all of the feedback we've received, and looking for your guidance as well as we continue to build this out and refine it as a one-year plan going forward within a context of the crisis that is COVID-19. So you'll see here, this is the data that we are now tracking. Vastly different data than what we were tracking at the beginning of this planning process. We have served over 120,000 meals since the closure. That's incredible work on the part of our operational staff. I want to thank Dr. Hall, as well as the entire cafeteria team that's been putting that together, putting that out. We've had volunteers, the Aramark team, our cafeteria staff working hard to make sure that every family who needs a meal has a meal. We've delivered over 3,000 Chromebooks to families in need. That's approximately 21% of our families have identified a need for a Chromebook. We're working to make sure that we meet that need. As we distribute Chromebooks, others are hearing about it, and they might not have raised their hand at the first round, but now once they see that they're being distributed, they're now raising their hand. So not only has the Chromebooks been a great process to making sure people have access to remote learning, it's also been a great process to connect with families. And so we're continuing to provide those Chromebooks out throughout another round of distribution. Currently 3,020 have been distributed, and you'll start to see how some of this data has led to additional action steps within our planning process. Next slide. So here's the challenge that we're facing right now. As we now have a closure announced for the rest of the year, we're very proud that we've been able to reach 99% of our families, that 8 schools have connected with 100% of their students. Very early on in this process, our goal was to keep everybody healthy and safe, to make sure that everybody was emotionally served, that everybody had confidence in this unstable environment that they found themselves in. And now as we're shifting from enrichment or optional activities to required activities, we're starting to track the attendance and engagement within those activities. And you'll see here that we have 60% of our students who are participating in a range between 50% and 80%. Glass half full, there's not a lot of there's a lot of difficulty there in the same strategies we were using previously to engage students, but our goal is 100%. As families are working through these unknown routines and working to create routines, I just wanted to take a point to emphasize for all of our families that this is required learning. The expectation is that all students are engaged in learning. It's not online learning, it's remote learning. And there are opportunities through the learning packets that we distribute if that's the routine that works best for a family. Teachers are reaching out to all kids. And if there's anything else we can do to support families, you can see there in the list of things that we're working to do, we're making sure that we can do it. But you see these numbers are vastly different than the numbers we're typically tracking of approximately a 95% attendance rate across the district when we're in the traditional school environment. So we still yet haven't figured out and won't know what the implications are of moving to remote learning versus a traditional school schedule, or for the youngsters who are unable to participate every single day. But we're working every single day to make sure we can serve every single family. Next slide. So with that said, we really have a lot of confidence in the directional path that will be laid out before you today. However, we think the best course of action for the district is to shift to a one-year planning process as opposed to a 5-year planning process, to ensure that we can truly strategically plan within the crisis environment that we're in now. We're learning more each day, but the sands continue to shift. It was just a few days ago that we learned, while it may have seemed inevitable, we did just learn that our schools were closed for the full year. And we still have yet to learn whether summer school is even going to be a possibility going forward into this school year. We will have to develop a plan for what it looks like when kids arrive into school in the fall. I think our governor said it's not just going to be a light switch. I think he used the analogy of a light switch on and said it's more like a dimmer. We've got to figure out what that means in the life of Lowell Public Schools, and that's something that we've got to be planful for going forward. But there has been a considerable amount of community input. We've continued through the vetting process, and we feel really good about the directional path forward. So with that in mind, committee, we are going to be looking for your guidance tonight. Please feel free to ask questions. Ms. Phillips, were you able to connect?
Yes, I'm able to connect. I'm wondering if we can switch to presentation mode. Is that possible?
I don't know if we can switch to that on this, Latifah.
Oh, okay, no worries. We'll just go through it this way. If we can go to slide 5.
For the committee, I don't think there was an announcement earlier. There was double booking on the TV station, so you'll see in the upper corner that this is being recorded and it will be played and broadcast at a later time.
Latifah, I believe if you just on your own screen go to presentation mode, that's
Okay.
what we'll see.
Okay, Jim, do you want to share the screen? And I'll actually ask Dave to put it on there.
Latifah, I don't have shared screen access yet.
Okay. Let me just take one.
I will tell you, I don't know if anybody else in their place of business used Zoom prior to this pandemic. I'm becoming more and more fluent with Zoom. I'll probably use this once we all come back to work and continue to use it, but I never had even heard of the app before. So
we had used it for maybe a year and a half or so, but nothing like the way we're using it now. So
we just had to upgrade our account. So I see Colin on there. Colin, thank you for the recommendation. We upgraded our account here so we can serve the millions and millions worldwide that are interested in accessing the school committee's Zoom meetings. And look at that thumbs up. Appreciate it.
So Jim, it's saying host disabled attendee sharing screen.
Way to go, Jim.
Jim is our resident Zoom expert, by the way. So if he doesn't know it.
Oh, great. I think we're going to have to go back to the
PDF?
Stone Age way, Latifah. Sorry.
No problem. No problem. we tried.
Yeah.
Okay, so this presentation is a high-level summary of a larger narrative document that's been created. It's about 40 pages, but it's still in draft form. So today we wanted to get your feedback on this high-level summary to guide our drafting of the larger document, and then we'll share that document with you following your feedback. So this process started long ago, beginning with the superintendent hiring process, where feedback was received from the community around a vision and goal for the district, on closing opportunity gaps and cultivating more equitable learning environment. Once Dr. Boyd was hired, he immediately embarked on a listening tour to gather information on the district's strengths and challenges, opportunities. He conducted over 60 listening sessions with staff, over 40 gatherings, and made more than 100 school visits in the first 100 days. And then we formally started our strategic planning sessions and convenings from October through December. And in January, we went back to schools to kind of vet what we were hearing. We made it to 20 schools prior to school closure in March. So a lot of work and feedback has gone into this plan. And the past 2 weeks, we have been convening small groups, focus groups, both staff, community, and our steering committee to vet the information that we're going to share with you today. We can go to the next slide. So I just want to remind everyone of our overarching goals that Dr. Boyd had shared at the beginning of the school year. We have 4 goals that are driving our work. The first is to improve academic achievement at every Lowell Public Schools school site, to improve operational efficiency across the district, ensure that our schools and our district have a safe and welcoming culture and environment, and we want to increase our community engagement and empower our families as partners. So all of our work has been around trying to develop the strategic priorities and action steps to realize these goals. So through all of our listening sessions, information gathering, there are 4 conclusions that I want to share that shaped our strategic priorities. So the first is that throughout our school, students are experiencing meaningful, innovative, engaging experiences. So we do want to acknowledge that there's a lot of hard work happening across our district, a lot of success happening across our district. The second conclusion is that the diversity and commitment to equity is our advantage. So we realize that that's what makes our district unique. And through our planning, we want to place our diversity at the forefront of one of our district's strengths. And then the third conclusion is that while we have success happening in pockets across our district, we still have to strive to eliminate achievement gaps that exist and reduce systemic barriers to excellent opportunities. So, and then our last conclusion is that our programming needs to be fully aligned with an increasingly competitive world that our students will graduate into. So with those 4 conclusions, we developed strategic priorities to help us accomplish our goals. So the strategic priorities are 4 core work streams that have emerged to, again, help us realize the goals. And as Dr. Voigt mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the COVID-19 public health crisis is going to impact our work for next year. We're going to have to modify our plan for next year, but we don't want to lose sight of the goals that have been set, and we don't want to lose sight of all of the information gathering and planning we've done for the past 9 months. So at this point, I want to turn it over to David Murphy. He's been our strategic advisor on this initiative for the past 6 months. He's coordinated our convenings, our teacher listening sessions, individual interviews, small listening sessions. And so I want to give him the opportunity to talk us through the priorities. We'll talk through each priority and the action steps that have been set, and then we'd like to gather your feedback, you know, one priority at a time, if that's okay.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. If we could forward to slide 9, you see there on the left the goals that Ms. Phillips was referring to momentarily ago, and then the 4 priorities that have been established. And I think one of the ways to think about the role of the strategic priorities within the strategic plan is that they are an articulation of where the more abstract and conceptual pieces of the plan in terms of the ideas and the convictions of the district and the organizing principles that the organization is committed to meet the more substantive, concrete work streams that for most people, frankly, that interact with the strategic plan will think of this plan as built around these sort of tangible pieces of work. That being said, one of the sort of challenges of these priorities, and we'll go through as we go through each one, sort of the rationale behind them emerging as sort of the top tier work streams that need to be focused on, is that they aren't fully parallel with one another. And what I mean by that is for some of them, they're focused really on a sort of more narrow sliver of the organization, whereas others sort of transcend organizational components and really have an organizational-wide impact if advanced. That being said, they all do intersect in one way or another, and as we sort of tease out the actionable objectives that are associated with them, I think you'll see how they're interconnected. But and I know you've seen this, so I'll speak as briefly as I can. But priority 1 is about access to early learning and the recognition that because so much of both the work and the expertise resides outside of the organization and within community partners. The focus of priority one is on the collaboration and the support of those partners, and through that collaboration, ensuring that best practices are being shared across the community, and that the district is benefiting from that expertise and institutional knowledge that is residing within the community partners. Priority two is, I think, probably the most all-encompassing piece. It's about access to high-performing seats. And one of the sort of recognitions that we saw as we went through, and we heard it from folks anecdotally, but I think it's also evident in some of the data, that while there's pockets of excellence throughout the Lowell public schools, there is evidence of some systemic inequity when you see things like some of the long-term underperformance of certain programs or schools. And the question is what can we do organizationally to make sure that there's as much access to excellence as there needs to be. The third priority is about the alignment of what's happening at the secondary level with post-secondary opportunities, and understanding that an evolving world and a shifting landscape post-graduation means that internally as a school district, and particularly at the secondary level, we have to make sure that we're keeping pace with that, and that the high school and other secondary programs are structured to give students as many opportunities as possible to have fulfilling and meaningful post-secondary lives. And the final one, with regard to the competitive advantage that Latifa mentioned, the leveraging of the community's diversity and making sure that we're fully capitalizing on that. So we'll go through each of the four, and I imagine we'll take the committee's direction as to whether you'd like to stop and for each priority, or go through all four and then have questions and discussion at that point. But we can go to the next one. So again, first priority, and you'll see that each of the strategic priority is structured to first explain the why, as to why this was chosen amongst all the potential work streams and and what is the sort of rationale behind identifying this as the key work stream to moving the goals forward. And that has to do, in its most simplest terms, of preventing opportunity and achievement gaps from forming, and rather than responding to them in later grades. The other thing that we saw, and this is something that the superintendent, I think, referenced in just about every forum or meeting that we had as we were developing this, that this strategic plan, unlike some that you might find in other districts or in other time periods, is not about tearing down everything that's happening within the organization. There's a tremendous amount of good things that are happening within the Lowell Public Schools, and the goal of this plan is to capitalize on those strengths and then build upon the momentum that exists. And so that's why for each component, we've identified exactly what is the strength that we're looking to capitalize on and move forward. And then under the action steps, this is the part that frankly gets a little complicated, given that we're developing this at a very unusual time with the unprecedented implications of the public health crisis. And whereas in a more sort of normal time, we might have a more specific timeline and be able to say we're going to do steps 1 through 3 in year 1 and plan for steps 4 through 7 in year 2. That part is a little more complicated, and we are in the process of transitioning as necessary to have essentially a version of the strategic plan that can be actionable in the first year, while still retaining the ideas, goals, and feedback for the work that will happen when the ground becomes a little more sturdy for the district and for society. So, and again, if you read through these action steps, I won't go through each one because I know you have them, but you can see that this priority is really centered on the idea of greater collaboration amongst partners and supporting those partners to make sure that early learning is happening across the community, not just as much as possible. And then if we go to for each priority, the information, Jim, we can go to the next one. You can see that this content is divided up, and you can see how it connects with and relates to those overarching goals.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to add that this priority is really tied to preventing gaps before they form. So working with our community members about around best preparing our kindergartners as they come into our Lowell public school system.
Could I ask, Latifa,
Mhm.
so recognizing that this is the long-term goal, which
Mhm.
you know, it certainly makes sense. But I mean, the reality is that we will forever be welcoming students as kindergartners
Mhm.
with a variety of experiential kind of, you know, capacity.
Mhm.
Is there anything within this goal that should speak to the fact that there are changes we can make within our own system, within our
Mhm.
kindergarten
Mhm.
system,
Mhm.
that could make us more efficient and better able to kind of address students who may not have that experience,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
that's going to be the
Mhm.
reality,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, and I know as I was looking, and it may even be one of the previous iterations of some of this information, but I know historically we always look at third grade reading levels,
Mhm.
and we always say this is one of the indicators that shows we need more preschool, which is great. You know, I don't dispute that certainly, but you know, a third grade reading level is 4 years into our responsibility pool.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there does come a certain point where, you know, however a child comes in, we need to be
Mhm.
prepared to, you
Mhm.
know, address that.
Right. No, you're absolutely right, School Committee Member Martin, and that is also addressed in our next priority. But you're right that you know, however students come in, we want to provide the best service for them, but we want to strengthen our partnerships with our community partners to do what we can, right? To do what we can.
Oh, absolutely.
Right,
Just recognizing that there will always
right,
be a cohort of students that come
right.
that we'll need to deal with differently.
Yes, absolutely.
So if we move on to priority
Well,
two.
were there any other comments on priority one? We can always come back, but
Yeah, I have some comments on priority one, but I can wait to the end and go back.
Might be easier to do it as we go, Bob, just so we're all talking about the same thing.
Stay on priority one for a moment. It's near and dear to my heart, always has been. One of the best programs I ever seen in my whole life. And I mean, nothing can match it. Was at Start. It was the biggest program. I thought the best program, feeder program for our system. Some things went wrong, like in many other things, and I'm not going to get into that part of it.
I think it would be wise not to get into it, Bob, unless you want to talk about specifics.
Yeah, I just want to say this part. I know they started about, I want to get, this thing is like getting along with all those groups, and I'm for that. What I'm saying is, the past couple of years, I think we've already made some big improvements in early education and spent a lot of money, and I think trying to fix it. I think Gene Franco at the time picked up an extra $5 million to help get this back to normal. And I think if we had a report on it, we can see how far it's already improved around Lowell and Drake. So that's my point. My point is, I don't think we're way behind in early education. I think Lowell has done a real good job. And it's more about daycare that I'm worried about. And I think we have to look into this issue, and I'm all for it. Thanks for letting me say something. Thank you.
thank you, Mr. Hoey. We can go on to strategic priority two.
Sure. So I mentioned that all of these are sort of, to some degree, of a different scale and different depending on the work. Hopefully you can hear the echo.
Yeah, Mr.
Sounds very
Murphy, you
dramatic.
sound a little bit like a DJ right now.
The last time it happened, it went away after a minute. So
Mhm.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Mm.
Do you guys have a different sheet than I do? I'm on page 8 for priority 2, and you're on page 12, maybe?
13?
Yeah. Are there 2 different pamphlets?
No, so we added the data that the superintendent had shared at the beginning of the meeting. So we are 3 pages behind.
It's the most recent COVID-19 data, Mr. Mayor. So we can make sure we can forward that to you. Mr. Hall, can you make sure you forward that to Mayor Leahy's email?
Sure.
All right, did this go out today?
There's just the presentation that we're sharing right now, so.
All right, I thought we are supposed to have this in our hand though while we're going over it. So, all right, thank you.
Go ahead, Dave.
So with regard to the second priority, again, they're not perfectly parallel with one another with regard to scale and scope. So you can see that strategic priority 2 is very much an organizational wide priority, and there's a lot of content in there. That being said, if you look through the action steps that are identified here, it is a way of sort of defining where that work is and where the focus would be. And some of them are sort of more discrete pieces that I'm sure you've heard about before, and that is work that has either been ongoing for several years or work that under different initiatives over the course of the 1920 school year. But those 7 work streams that are identified that range from some operational matters in terms of the moving to a one-to-one digital learning environment where appropriate, and making sure that there are appropriate ways of cataloging and prioritizing infrastructure objectives within school communities. And then preceding all of those is the piece that is reflective of what we've been through over the course of the last 5 weeks, and recognizing that to the degree that priority 2 is about eliminating inequitable institutional barriers, there is the risk of those being exacerbated over the course of the next year due to these closures and all of the uncertainties that come related to the COVID-19 health crisis. So all of that is sort of packaged into priority 2, but hopefully through looking through those action steps, you can see how this work would potentially be organized under this plan. Number 3 has the 2 asterisks next to it. The reason for that is a piece that was really identified through the strategic planning process as something that would be very helpful to the district, and particularly with regard to advancing the goal of having greater access to high-performing seats. And if we go to the next slide, you can see that we've sort of unpacked that piece there as to what it would look like to commit to developing a organizational and consensus-based definition of what constitutes high quality. And it begins with making sure that we have the systems in place to be able to assess, first collect, then assess, and then visualize in order to communicate about the data that is driving decisions. Numbers 2 and 3 on this slide related to social and emotional learning needs of students and the culture and climate work that's particularly happening right now within the Renaissance Network, but I know is a priority at all schools. That was really a piece that would have, I think, been included in various versions of the strategic planning process, but based on the feedback we heard from frontline educators, it became clear in various ways that was something that to have full buy-in and investment amongst staff and throughout the organization, that was something that they felt very strongly about with good reason. And then some of the more operational issues of making sure that there's appropriate enrichment activities across schools and the site-based budgeting that I know you've discussed in the past. To make that, again, like the subtext to site-based budgeting is making sure that those closest to students are making decisions about how priorities are developed. So if we go to the next one, again, for each of the priorities, there's these matrices are designed to sort of give you that content in ways that it's easy to connect the work to the goal areas. So that's priority 2. I know there's a lot of information packed in there, but I'll pause for a second in case anyone wants to discuss this before we move on to the secondary school component.
And Mr. Hall, can you go back to the prior slide? Thank you.
Any questions or comments regarding priority 2?
Could I ask, and this may not be kind of decided yet, but I think what would be particularly helpful in this area would be a lot of kind of concrete recommendations. I mean, I think, and I know this is talking at a high level, but I mean, the idea of being able to drive this down into some really well-defined best practices and things like that. I mean, the opportunity within the district to find really high-performing classrooms, high-performing programs, and being able to then replicate them across the district, I think is one of the our lost opportunities, things we should be doing more of. And so I think it folds into this really nicely, but the idea of having that, which I'm sure we'll be working on, that next level down of just really concrete steps that will be taken.
Mhm.
Anyone else? If I could just add to what Ms. Martin said, I think specifically around 2 and 3, I'd be interested to see what you're looking to do with that. And I think there is a difference between social and emotional learning and mental health issues and the discipline and behavior
Very true.
problems that come with mental health issues. So I would like to see that kind of broken down, because I think overall we absolutely need social and emotional learning and supports around that for our staff and our kids. But I think separate from that, and really almost rising to a crisis level, has been the mental health and discipline concerns that I'm hearing on my own. We see with those weekly kids taken out by ambulance, and then we saw further supported by the teachers survey, where many of the teachers said it was the largest impediment to learning is the discipline issues and the behavior problems in the class. So I really would like to see what are the first term steps that we're going to do to address both those areas separately, because they are separate.
That's great.
And school committee member Doherty, I'm glad you raised that, because that was feedback that we also received internally from staff. We didn't want to change the presentation too much. As I shared, we were continuing to have listening sessions, feedback sessions from the time this presentation was posted, but that was one of the key areas of feedback we received. And we will make sure that we have information both on mental health as well as meeting social emotional needs.
So if we move into priority 3, this again, we as priority 1 was focused on the access to early learning, priority 3 is focused on the sort of other end of the continuum through the pre-K through 12 plus trajectory, in that this is focused on secondary programming. And similar to number 2, there's a lot packed in here, and so we'll go to a second slide in a minute that to sort of do some of that unpacking. But this is about ensuring that the programming that secondary school students are exposed to and that they're experiencing is consistent with their needs post-secondary life. One of the challenges that all districts, and particularly high schools, face is not wanting to measure success and progress by how students perform as students, but rather by the quality of the prospects for success they have after their students. And so this, in addition to continuing the work of the school turnaround plan and its focus on some of the data points that you're familiar with regard to graduation and dropout rates and chronic absenteeism, particularly among students with disabilities, this envisions a redesign process that uses the current pathway system that's in place and develops that through 5, what I'll use just for purposes of this discussion, because I think there is some terminology that needs to be tweaked, but overarching pathways. And if we go to the next slide, I'll go back to portrait of a graduate in a minute, unless you want to comment on that, Latifa. But the overarching pathways would be the idea that the high school is structured around the expanding early college and college level programming opportunities through advanced placement and dual enrollment and the early college program, the alternative education options portfolio that would be developed and would continue some of the momentum that's there in some of the existing programs, and then the continued examination of career and technical education programs, both internally and with regard to the district's partnership with Greater Lowell Technical High School. And the point is to give students the opportunity for an intentional pathway through their secondary school experience that is both engaging to them, so they have the opportunity to be successful and feel fulfilled as students, but most importantly is relevant to the post-secondary opportunities that are available to them after they graduate. That's priority 3, and again there's the matrix, if we go to the next slide, that has how that work intersects with the goal areas. As I think Ms. Phillips mentioned, this is sort of the higher level version of documents that are much more in depth and go into some the more specifics in terms of next steps and data driving these priorities. But hopefully this sounds familiar to you, and in many ways is a continuation of some of the pieces of information that's been presented to you in the past. Any
comments or questions about?
I actually have a question.
Mr. Dakota?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't see much commenting on this particular strategy as it deals with the high school, and nothing mentioning about, no mention of the high school project that could have a serious impact on our kids. And we don't even know if this project is going to start this fall, this next spring, and where is it going to fall in our next school year going forward.
Mhm. Right, so thank you for sharing that with us, School Committee Member Dakota. That is something that we've been discussing, that will be in the longer form that we share with you. But this was the plan that we had created prior to the virus, right? So we wanted to acknowledge all of the input that we had received up to that point, because this is still our core goals, our core strategies. But you're right. Now that we are in this crisis situation, we do need to acknowledge how that project will impact our learning into future years.
Thank you.
Do we want to go to priority 4? So the fourth priority with regard to leveraging the community's diversity also has a number of sort of offshoots connected to it, and all of which are extremely important. And I'll walk through them again at a high level, but we're happy to take questions. With regard to the why, one of the pieces that were part of our discussions as we went through various school committees, and something that certainly the steering committee, which is made up of a broad representation of stakeholders, felt very strongly about as well, is that the community's racial, ethnic, and linguistic diversity really does distinguish it from virtually all other communities, and the school system is very reflective of that. And so both for purposes of capitalizing on that and making sure that students reap all of the benefits that come with growing up in and going to school in a globalized community, but also because by celebrating that diversity and prioritizing the diversity and awareness and cultural awareness, the district is better positioned to build meaningful and trusting relationships with more families and families that frankly oftentimes may, for various reasons, be marginalized and not be able to enjoy the type of robust school and family partnership that we know is important for students. And I think one of the key takeaways from one of the first discussions we had with the steering committee was the idea that a lack of trust in governmental institutions oftentimes extends to school districts. And we see now, frankly, when in the midst of a public health crisis, how that lack of trust can be problematic for all folks. But for a student to essentially be victimized by that not having a strong and reciprocal partnership between a family and a school district because it's a governmental entity is obviously very, very problematic and not fair to those students. So recognizing that these are specific challenges that, as a result of the extremely diverse population of students and number of people that are coming into the community, that was something that was prioritized and that folks felt strongly about. And I think if you look at number 4, that's really sort of the key component to this, that improved communication methods is not just developing a more aesthetically pleasing newsletter. Improved communications means building stronger relationships. And so that as those relationships develop and as they strengthen, the communication becomes easier in all contexts, whether that's in the midst of a public health crisis or just in the regular communication that schools have with families on a daily basis as to the progress that their children are making. And I think is sort of the cornerstone of what we're talking about here, in addition to some of the other things that I know that you're familiar with in terms of deepening the applicant pool and making sure that the school site councils are representative and playing an important role within school communities. That communication piece and all of that and what that represents is really central to that idea. And that's the fourth priority. So I appreciate the opportunity to walk you through those. And that last slide after the last matrix there is a working vision statement as sort of a quick takeaway as to if successful and these work streams are executed properly, that what we would anticipate, what the impact that would have on each district for each priority. That's in numbered 20 on the screen. Thank you.
Yeah, and as Dave mentioned, you know, one of the big takeaways, as he mentioned, was relationship building. And even though, you know, we can increase our social media presence, we can send out the calls, the emails, but, you know, especially as our liaisons have been making the phone calls out to our newcomer families and to our families who may not speak English, that connection has proven to be really important. And I think sometimes we don't recognize, you know, that our schools as institutions can be intimidating sometimes. You know, even though no one has done anything wrong, sometimes it just can feel intimidating, and that's what's been shared. And sometimes you need someone to you know, just coax you along, help you understand how to navigate the system. And that's one thing that we're learning even through this pandemic is, you know, that we need to support our families with understanding how to navigate, you know, the different opportunities, the different resources. And it's not always easy when you don't have someone who speaks your language, even though the language line and our translation, you know, our translation softwares are very, very helpful. But the one-on-one connection is really critical.
Thank you. Did we have any comments or questions from the team here? Ms. Martin?
Thank you very much. You know, more than anything, I think I just want to say, you know, I appreciate the way this has been structured. I think it really is a good way of presenting the information. The kind of, you know, nexus slides between the goals and the strategic planning initiatives, priorities rather. I think that is a great structure for this information. I guarantee you I'm going to steal it and use it the next time I'm forced into a corner and have to do another strategic plan, which is often. But
Shan, did you get that? Did you get that in the minutes?
I'm the first one to steal good ideas. But I really do think that that's a really effective way of communicating that. So I appreciate that. I think that I think was very well done.
Thank you, Ms. Doherty.
Mr. Hoey?
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Murphy, that's your name, right? I think this is basically your idea. Am I correct to say that?
No, well, I would say that this is a collection of ideas and priorities representative of the feedback we heard from the community and consistent with the direction that the superintendent has set. So I think I'm sort of the synthesizer of the information, but I would not call myself the author.
Okay, but where did most of this information come from? What type of cities were they looking at? Were they looking at Lowell when this plan was drawn?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I think that the primarily from the superintendent's listening to our meeting with various community stakeholders, and when I say community there, I mean both internal to the Lowell Public Schools and within the greater Lowell community, and then in 20 different forums we held with frontline educators and going around to the various school communities.
Well, I know I'd need a lot more time to speak with you and ask you questions, and I really don't want to do that tonight, other than if we could go back to a few of them, like number 2. Can we go right back and look at number 2 for a second?
Sure.
There's only a few I want to look at, but number 2 is one.
Priority 2?
Am I going the wrong way?
Yeah, you want to go.
Jim, go down.
No, no. Go down to the other way. The other way, Jim. Keep going, keep going.
No,
One more.
that's,
Right there, stop right there. That's perfect.
Oh,
Yeah, this one here, when we first started out and I looked at 129,000 meals, I also know how much work was put into this and how much negotiation work with the union too. So people don't see how, I'm glad you did mention Jim's name first, Mr. Superintendent. Then you mentioned a lot of other different people. But we should know it. The school committee should know this because I'm going to let you know it right now. It's incredible what your team did right there. And then you go give away or let people use 3,000 Chromebooks. To me, that's another huge thing that we did. You lend them out. That's what we did. We lend them out to people, right? I'm pretty sure I'm correct to say that.
That's
So,
correct. Yes, that's correct.
right there, that's beautiful. Now, if you go up to number 5 for me, I'll be done as quick as I can. Number 5, right there, stop, please. This part right here, this is the part I like a lot. I mean, I know what you've already did, Mr. Superintendent, since you've been here. I don't know if it's 7 or 8 months. I haven't kept track. But I know one thing, on a scale of 1 to 5, this is where I'd give you a 5 if we were giving out, an evaluation, but I haven't done one in so long, I don't know what it's like. But you should get a 5.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Thank you. Thank you, sir. That's kind.
Oh, no, it's not kind. It's just facts, buddy. Give me, and I'll be done in a second. I'm sorry, Miss Doherty, but I appreciate you. I'm going to skip. No, don't skip. Go to number 7 for me. I want Mr. Murphy to hear something from me. Okay. This is where I need a minute or two. Our strength, Mr. Murphy, is definitely Lowell High School. I already know we have one of the best elementary schools in the state of Mass. Our high school needs a lot of work. There's 3,200 children roughly in there most of the time. And when I see this plan that the superintendent put together, I've seen a lot of talk about trade schools and vocational help. It's one of my biggest issues. It's been one of my biggest issues for 30 years of my life. You have about 1,000 children at Lowell High School that need more than in academics. They need to put a hammer in their hands. We need plumbers and carpenters, and everybody knows this. And to me, this is the time for us to make sure we set up our priorities right. I think the city council has to really look at getting our own Lowell trade school. I mean, and I want to look into a few things too in the future, if you can do this, Mr. Superintendent. You went around checking all the food and you found a problem there for us. Now I'm going to give you another one. I want to know something about the trade school. I want to know, like, how much money are we paying to the Lowell Trade, Greater Lowell Technical High School? And I want to know, like, Lowell students, when they get a choice of 3 automotive or carpentry or plumbing, what's the percentage of Lowell kids getting their first choice out there? And the last thing I want to say about it is this. I don't know why we can't have someone like Ms. Desmond. Ms. Desmond knows when a child goes through our system, which one needs to be at a trade school. And some of these children that have perfect attendance, they don't cause any discipline problems, they just have a hard time learning. That's all. Case in point, me. And that's why I say, I'm glad this plan has a lot more about vocational schools. So I want to give you credit there too, Mr. Superintendent. I'm almost done. Number 9, if you could, real quick for me. I got one more thing for you coming up, Mr. Murphy, and I'll be done. I don't know why I looked at number 9 a lot. I think it was about all the students, high-performing seats. I have a hard time with that. I don't think we'll have enough money to ever do something that quite that good. But I still looked at this whole thing really good, and I just got to pat you all on the back for that too. And the last thing I want to get there, and this just goes out to Mr. Murphy there. When I say Lowell High is our strength, what I mean by that is I've worked with a lot of different jobs in my life. And when you have 3,200 people in a building, maybe 400 employees, that's an incredible number. And how we stay as safe as we are is beyond me, but I do know it's the students. We roughly have, and don't hold me on numbers, 8% blacks, 29% Southeast Asians.
I have no
29
life. I'm listening to the school committee.
Yeah, and maybe 30%, maybe 30% Latinos.
I know.
You know, I'm almost done, but the Latinos are the ones that need to.
Mr. Hoey, Mary, Miss Payne, I think you got to mute yourself. That's Mary Payne, one of our district support
thanks.
specialists. Thank you.
They told me I need a life.
Oh, sorry, Miss Payne. Go ahead. If you hit mute on there, you're good.
Thank you.
At times on track because of all kinds of reasons, but it's a real big issue to me. I'd love to see someone like Miss Desmond be able to look at a child and say, hey, look at this one here. No problems at all. Great kid. Just can't get into that school. Just can't get into it because he can't learn how to read or whatever the problem is. That's some of the kids we got to get out to that school. I don't know if that's the answer, but Mr. Superintendent, on your spare time, if you ever find it, you and Cliff are doing a pretty good job talking about it. Just focus on it a little bit for me. And thank you for all that time, Ms. Doherty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hoey. Anyone else?
If I could, just as a point of privilege, Ms. Doherty, because I always like to make sure we can comment on the Philly pride that Mr. Hoey has shown with the love sign behind him.
Yeah,
That's the Philly love statue. If everybody can recognize that one from Mr. Hoey, who has no Philly pride in him at all.
Excuse me, this is my daughter. She's 40 years old. This is like if she ever comes back to me, it's like a condo, you know? Yeah.
Okay, if we could keep on track here. Mr. Dillon.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I know if I'm, thinking about any type of strategy moving forward for any district that, believes they need to improve, like discipline and opportunity are two things that I think are at the top of the list. And by opportunity, I mean like give kids every opportunity possible. And the early education piece, that's certainly giving kids an opportunity to be at the school more often, earlier, and gaining the benefits of that. But after school activities is a huge part, and we talk a lot about dropout rates and graduation rates, and there's a lot of data out there that says that activity programs, including music and athletics and any type of activity programs after school, are hugely important for those reasons. And anytime in general, but particularly in Lowell. And if you read that teacher survey, that that discipline is an issue in this district. And you can look right at the daily school, because everybody talks about the daily. So I'm going to use it as an example. It's no mystery why things are the way they are over there. And Liam Skinner does amazing things over there. He does everything well. But the first thing that he does well is he's got his building in order when it comes to discipline. The kids know exactly what they need to be doing. And if they are not doing it, then, they're going to pay the repercussions to it. And he maintains that building supremely. He does an excellent job. And so in any type of strategic plan that I would see moving forward, especially in an urban district like this, discipline and creating more opportunities for kids. Something that I would hope to see more in our planning. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dillon. Anyone else?
Ms. Doherty?
Yep.
Hi, this is Hillary Clark. I just wanted to comment and say thank you for the presentation. I think there's a lot of really great information in here, and I do appreciate the comments earlier by Dr. Boyd and Ms. Phillips, in that, perhaps while we're going into this next year with a lot of unknowns, that there's still a lot of, there's definitely opportunity here to really work towards, continue to work on this strategic approach. specifically around the relationship building with our school site councils. I mean, some of the things that are within this presentation and plan are not monetary or, not connected to dollars. And I think, by continuing to work or prioritize perhaps those initiatives above the others, or in line with the others for next year, really focusing on those relationships, I think we can make great strides in a year where there might be not as much money to go around. And with the hope and knowing that perhaps in the future money is going to return and we will be able to move forward in some of these other ways. But that focusing on the areas where we can make progress, specifically the relationships, I think is a good one. So thank you.
Thank you for that point. Anyone else?
I have one more thing, Ms. Doherty, if I could.
Mr. Hoey?
Thank you very much. I think when you talk about the wellness part of everything and how much help we need with psychiatrists and social workers, and right now, I think more than ever, I know academics and it's everything, that's what we should be thinking about, making sure it's all the best. But at this time, I think we should be leaning more toward trying to make people smile and be happy, and the children at home, even great students. I'm getting calls that and people just let me know. I never had so many calls about children crying just because they miss their friends. It's really catching up to a lot of people. It's not affecting me. I'm just eating more. I'm having a good time, to be honest with you. I'm all by myself and I can study things, and that's why I've been talking so much, because I'm looking at everything. But I think you're right on the money, Ms. Doherty. With that issue right there, I think we have to look at wellness. Everybody, even some teachers, but the children especially. So thanks for the extra time.
Thank you. I don't know if
Sorry.
Mayor Leahy?
So quick question. I know I joined late. Strategic priority 1. How do we engage the kids early? We talking before preschool or at preschool?
Yeah, so this is referring to from the time they're born until the time they enter school. So it's doing two things here within this priority. It's expanding access to traditional preschool, but it's also redefining it. So it's both there, Mr. Leahy. Right now we call preschool age 3 and 4. This is redefining it to say 0 to 4. And then it's also expanding access within the current traditional preschool. Right now there's 400 students ages 4 throughout our community that don't have access at all. And then at age 3 is the first time that we provide any type of access. We don't even get into the early learning conversation until age 3. So this priority does both of those things, Mr. Mayor.
So how do you do that through the action steps then?
So Mr. Murphy, can you move down to those action steps for priority 1 and summarize?
Thank you, Mr. Hall.
I think you're going, is he going the wrong direction?
Yeah.
All right, wrong direction.
There it is.
Mr. Murphy, can you summarize those action steps for the Mayor?
Sure. So the first, I think it's recognizing that it's a shared endeavor and always will be, that there are valuable community partners who have institutional and professional expertise that the district works with and works well with for the most part, but that there's a need to redouble our efforts in terms of building those partnerships and helping with the coordination of support and the synergy that comes through the district partnering with the organizations is in part how we can ensure that there are best practices being employed throughout. And then also, I think we talked about how the communication piece transcends each of the priorities, understanding the responsibility to connect with families, both the families that we traditionally have connections with and are able to communicate with, but also families that aren't connected necessarily to the district or to other agencies that they can benefit from as they're raising children in those early years. one of the pieces of data that we saw, and it was a relatively small sample size, so I don't want to overstate its implications, but there was a high percentage of families who cited lack of financial resources as to why their children were not enrolled in some type of preschool program. But then there was a higher percentage of families within, again, a modest sample size that said they didn't know what the eligibility requirements were. And so the inference there is that there's some percentage of families who are making assumptions as to what resources are available to them. And what we're saying with this priority, by emphasizing communication, we're trying to connect with those families earlier, which does two things. Hopefully puts them in a position to make more informed choices about where they can access resources and potentially give their children more educational services prior to kindergarten. But also, from the district's perspective, strengthening the relationships at an earlier age so that we enjoy that school and family partnership right from the beginning and can build on that partnership throughout the child's educational career.
So how does that relate? I mean, honestly, I guess, you know, either you have the money to pay for preschool or you go to public preschool. And if you can't get into preschool, like we only have so many seats, right?
Yeah, so that's part of it. And I think what you see there with number 4, Mr. Mayor, that 2,000 days is essentially a count of a child's life, age 0 to 5. So what we would be doing there is working with our community partners to map out what the benchmarks should be, 0 in those first 2,000 days of a child's life. Then we would have to pool our resources and make sure that combined across this community, we have confidence that kids have access to all those seats. We know right now that within that pooling of resources, we're short 400 seats for our 4-year-olds. We have to go back and analyze that data to 3-year-olds, and we haven't even defined as a community what the expectation is for a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old. Some of that includes home visitation, access to adult learning and parent courses. So we would have to map that first, and then you're right, there is a gap in resources. We can't simply say we want every kid to be in preschool when we don't have the seats. Some of those may be dependent on the school district providing those seats. Some of that, we'll have that conversation when we get to the finance subcommittee, but some of it is not dependent on the school district. As Mr. Murphy was sharing, I've been really, really impressed with the level of collaboration across our early learning provider community. We have a very large early learning council. We have another group that's been working hand in hand to start thinking through what this first 2,000 days looks like. So we are actually just one of the partners within this conversation. Community Teamwork's been there at the table. They're the second largest provider, or actually in some definitions might even be the largest provider, even beyond the public schools, depending on how you want to define early learning. So there's a lot of partners there, a lot of momentum. The Community Foundation's been there at the table discussing this one. So I actually think this one, Mr. Mayor, might cross your desk in multiple ways as the mayor of the city, in addition to being the chair of the school committee. This is really going to be a citywide effort to make this happen.
Okay, so are we trying to expand preschool then to every school, or are we gonna?
Yes. The simple answer to that one is yes. We would be trying to do that, but it's going to require collaboration across. It might be done in a way that's not district seats. We're going to have to look to external partners. Right now, we spend approximately, for the one early learning school we have, the Cardinals, approximately $1.8 million. That's only part-time programming. So if you start to double that, if you recall from the Student Opportunity Act presentation, for us to provide those 400 seats at a full day, it would approximately be double that. We know in this next fiscal environment that we're going to be entering with the pandemic impact on the economy, that's probably going to be out of reach. So this is one that we've really got to think about doing in a more creative, more innovative way with our partners. But yes, we're going to be looking to provide seats for sure in some way.
Transportation is a big part of it.
Yeah, the transportation is another one that's come up in a lot of our listening sessions. There's been 2 parts that have caused challenges with access beyond just the fact that people don't have seats. One is the part day. Part day just doesn't work for all families. So just replicating what we have at like the Cardinal with part day probably wouldn't work. And then the second is that transportation. So if we're going to actually expand seats out, we need to think about how we overcome the barriers that even go beyond just having a seat in the first place. Transportation is definitely there, and that's another cost for sure.
All right. And what about, is the Ann Sullivan Center Are they still around, or are they in the mix here too?
Ms. Desmond, are you familiar with that provider?
You mean the Tom Ann?
Well, when my kids were in school, I thought it was called the Ann Sullivan Center.
I'm gonna have to defer to Ms. Desmond. Give her a sec.
So Ms. Martin's correct. It is, we still have some students that go to early intervention at that center.
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, is that all kind of in this action steps, but not really?
Yeah, because what you see here is that each of these, and as Ms. Martin was hitting on it earlier, there's many sub-plans that would come out of this. This first 2,000 days would be its own entire plan. That would be a subset of this that would then start to roll out. I mean, this could be, a war and peace size document
Right.
if we rolled into all of it. So some of these are going to necessitate guidance here from the school district that we endeavor to go down this path, and then working collaboratively to build out sub-plans. There seems to be a lot of momentum, though, Mr. Mayor, around that notion of the first 2,000 days. Mr. Hoey asked a question about what other communities have done this. I believe Charlotte, North Carolina has a pretty well vetted community-wide, citywide first 2,000-day plan that you can kind of see. Miami's done some of this work, but there's not a lot of cities that have been out the forefront. The first conversation most cities were having is around the kind of looking at it in halfway, like 1,000 days, looking at it from the early ages of 2, 3, 4 or beyond, now going down to 0. So there are some city models. It's going to require a full planning process, and I've just been really impressed with the amount of collaboration around. This will be one that likely you'll be finding yourself in conversations with other partners throughout in your seat as mayor beyond committee chair. And I think at some point we'll probably want to have this full conversation with all the partners around the table to perhaps give a full community-wide presentation to the committee as we go through it. There's a lot of partners doing a lot of work on this area.
Yeah, I know. Personally, I've had experience in this, and I know that there's a lot going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how important it is. Obviously, the barriers are always transportation and costs. The only other, just to kind of generalize on the other steps, so we don't take up that much time, is just, obviously from grade 1 to grade 8, we have to make sure we challenge our students, whether it's just reading books or extra math classes or whatever, science. And I want to see more of the support for teachers. All these plans, they look good, but if we don't have the right personnel performing this, we're not going to go anywhere either. So we need to make sure that we have training and professional development for our staff, because they're the other half that's so important to this. If they don't get it, the kids aren't going to get it. So I see some of that in here, but I don't see it explained well enough. Maybe it's just, again, it's a sub, it's going to come out of discussion again. So that was all I had for now. So thank you.
Thank you, Rona, for those comments. At this point, I'd like to throw it back to the administration. I know that we're looking to get something that is like the next year, because we can't really go out 5 years. So what are you looking from us right now for us to provide you at this point that will help you get to the next stage, which is maybe giving us those more specific action items that we're going to try to implement in the upcoming school year, given the unknowns we still have. And as Ms. Clark said, there are things we can do that about relationships, about, building capacity that doesn't necessarily have a huge dollar amount on it. So what is the guidance or feedback you're looking to get from us tonight?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that, number one, the feedback that has been provided, this continued vetting is extremely important. But I think the bottom line guidance that we're looking for is the comfort of the committee for us to transition in a direction of a 1-year plan. We've made the commitment before, and the guidance I've received formally before from the committee is building out a multi-year plan with this year, looking at this year as the one-year plan that was setting the stage. Given all of the unknowns and given the significantly evolving environment that we're all in right now, I believe the direction we should head is another one-year plan that continues to set the stage for long-term improvement. There was consensus. We have a strategic advisory board that has been advising this process in many ways. They met 2 times the last 2 days. There was consensus among that group that one-year plan seemed to be the right direction to go. But I would be looking for that guidance from the committee. If you're comfortable with the one-year plan, that transitions this a bit. And I would like that formal guidance from the committee if that's possible, Ms. Doherty.
Thank you. It makes sense to me. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts about it. Ms. Martin?
I think it's absolutely appropriate for us, for this shift to move towards a one-year plan that is reasonable and accomplishable, and that will set the stage for moving forward. So I think that it's a very wise choice to kind of, pull back a little bit and to focus on this next year, recognizing that it could very well be the most challenging year the district ever sees. So I would make a motion I'm on the subcommittee, right?
Yes. Mr. Dillon.
So I'd make a motion for the policy subcommittee to accept this report from the administration and recommend to the full committee that it be approved at our next scheduled meeting.
Can I get a second from Mr. Dillon on that?
Well, yeah. What are we doing? We're just going to approve it?
We're approving to go forward with one-year plan.
All right. I don't know. I have a tough time believing that the staff is going to buy into any plan that doesn't address student behavior.
Well, we don't know what the one-year plan is yet. We're just saying, look, given these goals,
Yeah.
come up with a plan to get us just through the next year, the next
So
school
we're just
year.
voting on a plan to do a one-year plan.
Yes, instead of a multi-year.
Okay, excellent.
No, I'm sorry. My motion would be to accept this as our plan for the first year. So cited within that was within school culture and some of the other areas was addressing the behavioral issues and so.
Well, I know.
Yeah, okay, whatever. You can.
We don't have all the details of that yet, do we?
But you wouldn't. It's a plan to figure out what those are.
All right.
Right. Okay.
But I mean, it's up to the committee to
talk more through the process then.
Yeah.
Right.
If I could assist a bit, we've got 2 processes that are going to come together, which you might notice through your scheduling. We have the finance subcommittee that's going to be vetting the budget. We also have the policy subcommittee that's going to be vetting the strategic plan. Ultimately, you've got the organizational priorities that are going to lead to your funding priorities that then lead to your budget. So they're all going to be coming together for greater specificity going forward. If that helps at all, Committee Member Dillon.
Yep. Thank you. We'll just talk it through.
Okay, so I have a motion by Ms. Martin, seconded by Mr. Dillon, to move forward with a one-year plan that we'll get more specifics on next week. All those in favor? Is that okay? Okay, all those in favor? Aye, okay. Motion passes. Anything else? Motion
Thank
to
you.
adjourn?
Thank you. As a commercial, this does relate to our next subcommittee meeting. So everybody join us for our finance subcommittee is Wednesday, Ms. Martin?
Yes.
I believe Ms. Martin's the chair of the finance subcommittee. There is a
Yeah.
thank you, committee members, and thank you all, and thank you to our staff for their incredible work during this very difficult time. Thank you.
All right, motion to adjourn by Ms. Martin, seconded by Mr. Dillon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Bye. Stay healthy, guys.
Bye-bye.
See you next week. Bye. Thank you.